All right, Benji, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Eden. Really
Great.
appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your followers.
Awesome. So, Tikva Group, what is it?
Several months ago, my partner and I sat and we discussed ways of getting Americans and foreigners to Israel, as well as allowing Israeli investors the opportunity and young couples the opportunity to buy and build their own homes. Tikva Group is a purchasing group, Kvutzot Rechisa in Hebrew, that is very much different than a traditional building opportunity that you might encounter. In a usual, typical business or building experience, you speak to a kablan, a contractor, he'd say, this is what I got, this is what you got to give me, etc. The Kvutzot Rechisa that Tikva Group is forming, or Tikva Group has formed at least two Kvutzot so far. The general concept is that we collaborate almost in a co-op arrangement where, depending on the number of members, whether it's 30 or 40 or 50, whatever the number is, we all get together and we move in, or we invest or what have you. And by doing so, you're not paying a third party to market because we're doing it all internet-wise. You're not paying a kablan the premium. You're paying whatever it is for the purchase of land and the purchase of the construction. And that's how it works.
Gotcha. And how did you come to the Tikva Group, to this idea of organizing Kvutzot Rechisa? What is your professional background?
Both Yariv, my partner, Yariv Aron, and myself are lawyers by trade. I practice in the field of elder law and estate planning, and he practices in real estate and development and all matters relating to commercial and residential real estate. And he's my friend, my neighbor, my partner. And we started talking about ways to bring Americans in at the height of COVID and have opportunities for investors to invest. So we sat and we formulated this concept. It's not a new concept, but it's a new concept to the Anglo community. I speak on a personal level that I participated in a Kvutzot Rechisa as an investor many, many years ago. And I was the only Anglo speaker in the assembly, if you will, of 600-700 people. All right. So from an American public, whether it's the New York, California, what have you, we want to try to market this idea at a cheaper rate and a cheaper cost to the Anglo community, as well as the young investor here in Israel.
Gotcha. So we'll talk more about Kvutzot Rechisa and also where you're doing Kvutzot Rechisa. But I want to talk a little bit more about real estate generally. There's so many young couples. So I would divide up the markets, the type of people that would invest with you, I would say, tell me if you agree, into two categories. Young couples, families that are looking to buy property to live in versus investors. There's a lot of young couples that are looking at the prices, and A, they're saying, I can't afford it. It's very expensive. And B, they're saying, you know, I'm seeing this huge trajectory in the past of Israeli real estate really taking off. Is that really sustainable and going to continue? What do you feel is the outlook of Israeli real estate going forward?
So just this morning, something came across my desk from Globes, an article, which I didn't fully read, just I read the caption, the headline, and it said that Israeli real estate is at the highest it's been in 10 years. And the Israeli shekel is much higher and stronger than the American dollar in the last 10 years. And between COVID and the election results and all the things going on globally, I just don't see Israeli real estate lowering in price. I think the Israeli mentality is, oh, if it sits on the market for 6 months, whereas in America, if you're trying to sell a house in Teaneck or what have you, and there's no bites, you lower the property costs or the property price. Here in Israel, they raise it. It's sort of like inverse reality, but that's what's happened. And I go back to my idea that I share with many of my friends and neighbors when I talk to them about these projects. If 35 years ago, you came to Chashmonim, where I live, and you said, oh, I said to you, I have a parcel of land for purchase, and it's going to cost $5,000. What would your response be? No, it's a dirt path. There's nothing here. There's sheds. There's no houses. It's nothing going to be here. Well, that same parcel of land 30, 35 years later is worth minimum $500,000. And that's what's happened in areas that are close to the center. And what the government tries to do is, of course, spread it out, move up people to the Golan or down to the Negev. What we try to do in finding Kvutzot Rechisa are, if you're going to find an area or want to live in an area that's going to be 15, 20 minutes from Yerushalayim, 15, 20 minutes from Yerushalayim, you're going to pay a premium. But not everybody in this country or worldwide needs to be in that area if they can work. And this is something that's really been proven through Zoom the last several months. People can work remotely, and if you don't have to be right in the area of Yerushalayim or commute to work, you could telecommute. You could live in the Shomron, where property values are cheaper, or the Yehuda, or other areas. And that's what we try to do. We try to find a Kvutzah that would meet the needs for a younger family, 3-4 children getting out of a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom apartment in Modi'in, which they can't afford, to a more sustainable lifestyle where they have a garden and a merpeset and some outdoor suburban kind of living.
Suburban utopia. I'm guessing you're still very much being a lawyer, very much connected to your community back in New Jersey as well, correct?
I have a lot of connections there, and people have reached out to me about these projects and engaged me in these projects because of my participation in them.
Do you think that with COVID and accelerating the virtual workspace, are people starting to understand that even if I'm a mid-career Aliyah to Israel is doable for me, and maybe we should be considering that?
I've spoken with people from New York, New Jersey, California, St. Louis about these projects, and they're talking to me about, well, this may not be the right time, but 6 months from now or 3 years from now, and that, from our perspective, from a time frame, works well because of how the Kvutzot Rechisa works. Because if they need 3 to 4 years to get their affairs in order, and we engage in this project, by the time they get here, they will have their keys for their apartments or their units, shall we say. So yes, there is this mindset from those people that America and other European countries isn't what it used to be 15, 20 years ago, and they want to turn to Eretz Yisrael as their future.
Gotcha. So let's actually talk about Kvutzot Rechisa, what they are, what your role is in them. Because I'll tell you, when I was looking for an apartment, everyone always warned me about Kvutzot Rechisa and the dangers of being invested with other people. So maybe let's talk about the development of land and apartments in Israel. How does land that there's just trees and rocks go and turn into houses in Israel?
I'll give you an example based on my personal experience. My partner, Yariv Aaron, grew up in Pardes Chana. One day, it's the northern part of Israel. One day he turns to me and says, let's take a ride to visit my parents. I said, sure, nothing going on. We take a ride out. And then he says, we're going to detour to a city of Harish. This is probably 2010. At which point he says to me, we're going to detour. And I looked around at Harish, there were cows grazing. And the government had already had plans in place to make this the next Modi'in. Modi'in is a city equidistant between Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim, that if 20 years ago you bought on paper, you'd get a very nice piece of property for a very modest sum. Now, Modi'in is very, very expensive. It perhaps is one of the most expensive cities in Israel. And because of that, it's unaffordable for many people. And I know that because I've had a lot of people who have contacted me about one of my projects, which is very close to Modi'in, and they tell me that they can't afford to buy something in Modi'in. Anyway, we go up to Harish, we look around, he says, this is going to be a Kvutzah. And at the time, the Kvutzot Rechisa was formulated by a group, and there were 700 members that participated in that group. And when you deal with 700 members, you got to really be very diligent about making sure that every one of those 700 members are going to make sure that they pay their bills on time, have the right accounting, having the right, all the due diligence that's necessary. Mm-hmm. Our Kvutzot Rechisa are nowhere near 700. Our Kvutzot Rechisa are in the ballpark of anywhere between 50 to 100 as well. And we're screening people when it gets to that point to make sure that they have the financial ability. But they don't need to have all of the financial ability versus a compliance situation. They need half, because what we do is we buy the land and we mortgage the construction part of it.
Mm-hmm. Got you. Well, I'm talking about for people who don't even know how the building process works in Israel. So who is in charge of giving permits to build? How does that work? How does that usually work in land that's not in a city that hasn't been built before, or is it on the outskirts?
In a typical arrangement, you have a kablan, a contractor, who will say to the general public, I own this land. Please invest with me. Please purchase the 50, 100 units in my building. I'll sell it to you at a certain price. When the construction is done, either they buy in paper or after he's already started developing it, they get their units. The Kvutzot Rechisa works a little bit differently. We don't own any land. What we do is we try to find the individuals. And collectively, we have 40, 50 people who then turn to us and say, okay, this is the area we want to live in. We want you to get a bid. That's what's known as the mechraz, the auction. Now, what we do when we submit this bid is we keep it close to our chest because we don't want to disclose that number to anybody else. Because
who are you submitting the bid to?
To the minhal, to the government agency that deals with these things.
Okay. So just so everyone understands, the minhal is the government agency. They auction off the land to contractors, to the highest bidder, who then buy the land, invest money, build on it, and then sell those apartments, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So in essence, you're going and turning to these government offices. And unfortunately, because of COVID, these government offices are working at a snail's pace. And I'm not criticizing anybody, but we're working on a Kvutzot Rechisa in a place called Mevo Modi'in. And we were expecting the Choveret to be released sometime in late June. We're up to December 16th. And the website says, wait, it's going to be delivered any minute now. Well, it's still out there and we're still waiting on it.
Gotcha.
But getting back to your point, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, yeah. So instead of a kablan buying it, how does the Kvutzot Rechisa operate?
So within the Kvutzot Rechisa, Yariv and I are the organizers of the Kvutzot. We're the marketers, we're the people orchestrating the Kvutzot. We, in a sense, screen the people to make sure that they conform with what we're looking for, meaning the financial, and also to make them feel comfortable with this community. For instance, there are many people who turn to me as an example saying, well, we want to invest. I said, fine, by all means. But if they turn to me and they say, we want to live here, and for whatever reason, it's not, as they say in Hebrew, matim, it's not appropriate for them for whatever reason, I would say, listen, many people have said to me, I want Yerushalayim. Well, this is not matim for them because the projects that we have is not in Yerushalayim. So I would dissuade them from a living perspective, but I would encourage them from an investment perspective. So the two of us are organizers, and we arrange the group together. And once we have our list filled, we then would submit the bid to the auction, and whoever wins that bid wins the land. So there could be competing bidders out there. And if we bid 1 shekel more than that other group, shall we say, then we would own the land. And now all 50 of us would have a part of that land. And now we would move forward with the construction of the individual units.
Gotcha. And what are some of the risks that people say with the Kvutzot Rechisa is that in essence, everyone in the group is paying for the building and development of the land. So if one person has some sort of financial difficulties that he can't put in money for that next step that needs to be done, the group can not have enough money to pay the contractors to do that. What kind of safeties are in place to make sure that that doesn't happen and the Kvutzot Rechisa doesn't end up taking a long time to build the project, or the project just gets stuck completely?
Well, I think the argument can be made in the typical kablan situation too. If a person invests with a kablan and the kablan says, give me money, and the gentleman has lost his job or had a setback, you have a similar situation. But specific to the Kvutzot Rechisa, your answer is a good one. Both Yariv and I come into this project with over 50 years of legal experience. So we've done our homework, and we don't want the project to fail because of a hiccup along the way. And we have on reserve, shall we say, investors to swoop up and carry the day should something happen to the typical individual or one of the individuals who can't, for whatever reason, meet his or her obligations. We have an investor come in to sell that or buy that piece of the property from that individual. And you know, one of the things in Israel, as we spoke about earlier, once the construction starts going, all right, if we have a 40-unit project and we're building the 39th house, people are going to start looking around and say, oh, this is almost done. I want in. right?
Right.
And they will then buy that excuse me. They would then buy that property. Excuse me again. They would then buy that property from that individual who's somewhat in distress.
Gotcha. So in essence, when buying, one of the advantages is a paper discount, so to speak, because nothing exists. You can get in for cheaper. What kind of benefit percentage wise do you think someone would be able to see buying in a Kvutzot Rechisa as opposed to just buying from a kablan on paper?
A kablan is making its money from doing this. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of overhead. He's got staff. He's got marketers. He's got surveyors. He's got all that in overhead that he's got to deal with. Okay. We don't have that. Okay. Yes. When the Kvutzot ultimately buys the property, then we're going to need contractors and the like. But we work with a battery of people that have done this kind of projects in the past. Yariv has been responsible for building hundreds and hundreds of units. So he knows the players, he knows the construction individuals, and we cut out the middleman, so to speak. And there's an element of buying power in place. When I'm building 30, 40, 50 units, I can say to the architect, hey, do me a favor, instead of a 50,000 shekel per course charge that you're going to charge, make it down to 20,000 shekel. So now I've reduced my overall cost to 30,000 shekel. In a typical kablan situation, he's not going to reduce that. He's going to say the architectural fee is 50,000 shekel. You're going to pay that 50,000 shekel. But with us, we're going to say, all right, it's only 20,000 shekel. So the 30,000 shekel will be saved by you. And you should know that on some of these projects that we're talking about, people are turning to me and say, if your name is on that project, your stamp of approval is there because we've known you, because of the type of work you've done in the past with the elder law community and the like, we know that it's going to be successful. Now, there's a lot of distrust amongst people, and that's unfortunate, but it is the reality that money changes people. And I have been involved in probate litigation for too many cases that I like to talk about. Wonderful people have fought over less, shall we say, right? And I think what needs to be done here is to manage expectations. You tell people up front, and this is what I do with law, and Yariv does with law as well. You tell people up front what's going to be, how long it's going to be, et cetera, et cetera. Now, when we started promoting this, we did not expect certain Kvutzot Rechisa to be delayed 6-8 months because of COVID. Nobody anticipated COVID would last through the end of 2020. But so long as it's successful in terms of managing expectations, it will be successful. And I think a lot has to do with the fact that I'm bilingual. I can deal with the Israeli public, and I also can deal with the American public. And the American public wants to turn to somebody who they can trust, who they can relate to, and understand what it means to buy and build an American-style home. All right, because whereas Israelis would say, no, we don't want a basement because the downside of having a basement may prove unproductive down the line when we want to sell it. The American population likes basements because they can send their kids, when they have Shabbos company, send their kids down to the basement to play. So there's that different mindset that I can relate to very well because I grew up there, but now I live here.
Gotcha. So where does Tikva Group come into this? Where are you making money? Because I'm guessing you're not doing this for free.
As much as I would love to have people come to Eretz Yisrael on everybody else's dime, shall we say, Tikva Group thus far has not turned a profit because we haven't participated or completed a project. There are 2 projects that we're working on. One is in a city right outside Modi'in, and that's called Mevo Modi'in. And the second project is a place called, in the Shomron, called Alfei Menashe. And I'm not going to plug those particular places, but I'll plug our website. And the website is www.tikva, TIKVA-GROUP.com, tikvagroup.com, and that's without an H. And Tikva, of course, in Hebrew means hope, with the expectation and hope that we would bring as many people from overseas as possible. We make our money on the building. We analyze how much it's going to cost to buy the land. We deal with all necessary paperwork. We deal with mortgage brokers. We deal with landscape engineers. We deal with interior decorators, everything like that, with coordinators, with consolidators. And then we make our money on the ultimate percentage on the project cost. And built into the cost, and it doesn't pay for me to detail exact specifics of the project. You can get that all off the website, but built into the cost includes legal fees, includes architectural fees, includes our fee, organizational fees, includes surveyor fees. Everything is a full project cost, including the land and the construction.
Okay, so you basically take a percentage of the cost of the development.
Generally, 8 to 10% of the total
8 to 10%.
fee is our fee.
Okay, and you know, costs can change while building. So do you come in and guarantee a certain that it won't go above a certain cost, or?
Well, thus far we've marketed Mavo Modin, and
Right.
we're in the process of marketing Alfei Menashe. Are there any guarantees? Listen, China can say next week that we're raising steel by 400%, in which case everything goes up. All right. But having had so many years of experience here, he says to us that he, as much as one can guarantee without guaranteeing, that these are the numbers that we're working on.
Okay, so you're saying I'll work my hardest to get you guys the best price as a group. Whatever that price is, I'm going to charge between 8 to 10% on top of that for managing the project.
No, the 8 to 10% is part of the total fee.
Oh, it's already built in.
Correct.
But we don't know what the exact cost will be at the end.
Then we would lower our fee to 7%, let's say 7 to 9%.
Gotcha.
To make sure that we get
Okay.
some. And I want to point out one thing. My family and our own family have participated in as one of the members of the Rechisha for Mavo Modin. So to the extent that if we're wearing two hats, we're wearing the hat as the investor and we're also wearing the hat as the organizer. If the fees go up or the costs go up for the investor, then it's also going up for me.
Right.
So I want to keep the fees down as low as possible. And if these people are going to be my future neighbors or my future individuals that I'm going to be dealing with business-wise, I don't want them coming back and snickering, oh, he charged me another 10,000 shekel. It doesn't make sense. That's not how I do business. So I want to try to get the numbers as closely and as finely tuned as possible.
Got you. So you got a little bit of skin in the game, which is always good.
Well, that's why people, I got to be honest with you, that's why people have participated in the project, because I've got, as you said, skin in the game.
Gotcha. Now let's break down the numbers and let's go to leaving the investors aside. We'll get back to the investors. But young couple, 2, 3, 4 kids, maybe even newly married, and the parents know that they want to get in ASAP on the Israeli real estate just to manage the risk of any future fluctuations in the Israeli real estate prices. So in a typical apartment, you can take a mortgage that is 75% of the value of the apartment. So how would the amount you can borrow work here? So you buy the land. At that point, you're mortgaging 50% of the land value, correct?
Of the construction.
Of the construction. So how can you get to 75% still?
So there are some techniques, but let's go back a step. When we're buying the land from the government office, they don't care how they get their money. They just want their money. Okay?
Right.
And when you're buying the land, and let's talk specifically about Alfei Menashe, because it's a project that we really believe in that's going to take off. We have 78 units that are Rivi'its. What does Rivi'its mean? On any parcel of land, you could build typically 3 things. You could build a single family home. You could build a du-mishpachti, which is 2 semi-attached homes side by side, or you could build Rivi'its, which is like 4 lots, 4 units on each major lot, or dunam, let's call it, 1,000 square meters. And I'm using the Hebrew concept of meters as opposed to square feet, just so it's easier for the Israeli public to understand. But 1,000 square meters is the dunam, shall we say, and on which you're going to build 4 Rivi'its. And each Rivi'it, each unit, is 162-meter property, which is a big sizable property for somebody coming from a basement apartment, let's say in Modin or Chashwanim, all right? So you have 162 meters, and all this information is, again, outlined with sketches, designs, all that fun stuff on our website. The 162 meters is ranging between 1.62 and 1.65 million shekel. Now that number, having spoken to a number of young adults, is a number that they can actually manage, because they don't need to get and drop down 1.62. They need to drop roughly 800,000, half of that money. Because when we buy the land for, let's say, 800,000, I'm not telling you that's the number that we're buying the land for. It may be more, it may be less, but it's probably going to be less than that number, but certainly not more. because if we wanted more, we'd have to take more. But if we buy the land for that amount, okay, we're going to need that money to pay the government. So now, once we have the land, we can start moving forward with the construction. So it'll take about 6 months to a year for permits to be obtained. All during that process, we're talking to architects, engineers, the families, to make sure everything's up and right, what kind of colors you want in your house, what kind of, whatever it is, all the detailed specifications that they may have. Now, once we move forward with the Kvutzah, and we move forward specifically with the construction, when our contractor, does the work and he meets a certain benchmark, let's say he pours foundation of the basement or of the first floor, there will be an inspector from the bank that will come out and inspect to see that he's met his obligations. If he approves that, the bank will give the money to the contractor and there will be no involvement of the 78 unit members. What will happen is that there will start to be a mortgage accrued to those 78 members, and each month, as that mortgage accrues, they're going to have to pay back the mortgage. So at the end of the day, let's just suppose the 1.6 million shekel is the total price. It's not, it's 1.62 or 1.65, but just for ease of conversation, 800,000 is required to be put down to buy the land. 800,000 shekel, I said dollars, but I meant shekel. 800,000 shekel is put down to buy the land. 800,000 shekel is for the construction. You can mortgage we as a group mortgage the second group, second 800,000 shekel. You're not going to go to Bank of Mizrahi Tvachot, and I'm not going to go to Leumi. We're all going to go to one collective bank that puts in the mortgage. Once the construction is done, and you have your keys, and you have your paperwork, and you have your permits, and all the necessary things, you can then go and separate from the Kvutzah. Meaning, you can turn to the bank of your choice and say, I want to talk to you about what the mortgage rates are for 15 years, 30 years, whatever it is, as a young adult. If you're in your 30s, 40s, you want to spread this out as long as possible, especially where interest rates are. And you know this better than I do, Eden, because you're in the financial sector. So now you've taken the paperwork that you have and the land that you have, and you take that 800,000 shekel, and instead of paying a higher interest rate because you're part of the Kvutzah, where it's greater risk, now that you own the property, you can refinance it and get it at a lower rate. And I know that from personal experience, because once I got all the paperwork for the property that I invested in the Harish, I was then able to take the necessary paperwork, go to the respective banks, shop between 3 different banks, and ultimately I wound up getting a better rate, far cheaper, saving myself close to 3,000 shekel a month with respect to the mortgage amount over a period of time. So that's how it works in concept, and it works in practice, that same approach, that same way.
Gotcha. So the buy-in, for regardless of where you're from, or you're an investor, a young couple, is 50%. But once the property finishes, there is the option to refinance based on your personal credit, so on and so forth, first time back down to 70 or 75%.
When it is all done, okay, the mortgage is going to be based on an appraisal of the property. And what I did when I was looking to refinance most recently, the appraisal value went up by about 40% from what I put it in. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot more equity in the house now, and therefore you can take out more.
Gotcha. Very cool. So
in order to be participating in our project, just so we're on the same page with respect to these numbers, we don't need all 800,000 shekel right away. There's a stage that needs to be done in terms of process.
Right.
When a person is very serious about this project and wants to commit, he or she signs a participation agreement. It's a contract that says that you are working with our group only and to the exclusion of any other group. And the reason why that is because the rules of the whole Kvutzot Rechisa concepts apply that if you are in both groups or 2 different groups, you taint both groups, and that's not permitted. So you sign a participation agreement, and with the signature of the participation agreement, the first 20,000 shekel is submitted. And that's held unless and until we wind up getting the bid. Once the choveret, which is the booklet, shall we say, that announces and publicizes and amplifies the mechraz is published, then we expect to ask you people, or our group members, to put in another, depending on the numbers, roughly 130, 150,000 shekel. And then once ultimately the bid date is set and we submit the bid, Then we have 45 days from that period of time, if we win, to pay for the land. And then a larger sum of money is required by the investor / group member.
Gotcha. And because it'll be a group of mostly Anglos buying in a certain area.
Not always.
Okay.
The project that we have in Mevon Modin, certainly Americans have heard about it because it was the former site of Shlomo Carlebach. So there's a lot of people that were interested in going back to that. Alfei Menashe, if you go to 5 towns, Teaneck, and you ask, where's Alfei Menashe in the map, they won't know, perhaps, but they'll know where Renana is. And Renana is so close to Alfei Menashe. But because of property values in Renana being so high and Kfar Saba being so high, this is a little east of those communities, 10, 12, 15 minutes away. If a person's marrying off a child and they want to buy something as a starting house for their children in the Renana area, you move to Alfei Menashe as a start. I see that being this project being really useful for the young investor, as well as a person who has some connection to Renana, Kfar Saba, that general area.
Gotcha. Yeah, what I wanted to ask you was, what percentage of investors versus buyers who are looking to live there are you trying to get? And do you think that there's a certain ratio that's necessary for the health of a project? Because I'll tell you what, I don't know if you're familiar with Ramat Givat Ze'ev, but I drove through there a couple times, and it was very difficult for me to understand exactly what's going on with this place.
I've seen it published and advertised, but I'm going to go back to the different project in Yerushalayim. David's right next to the David Citadel Hotel. Okay. Are they calling it your David? I don't. Opposite Mamila Mall.
Yeah, that little alleyway with a bunch of very expensive luxury. I would call it, I guess, units. It was like a row houses. Yeah.
Correct. So what happens there is the American public, the European public, have bought into that, and they come for the Chagim. Right. And that's wonderful. God bless. We welcome them with open arms until such time as you can't get here because of COVID.
Right.
So because of that, you don't have individuals coming, and therefore the consequence of that is you don't have the cleaning services that rely on it. You don't have the hardware store that relies on it, and all the other ancillary businesses that rely on the Makola and the like. So are we targeting investors? No, listen, I don't have a problem targeting an investor who's going to put a tenant there, but I don't want to have those apartments sit hollow because or sit empty, because I want to have that community grow, and it's only going to grow with the presence of people.
Right.
The government wants its tax revenue, fine, but I want to see children participating in gardens and playing outside. I don't want anybody just being remotely playing on the phone. I want them outside enjoying the beautiful weather of Sharon or Mevon Modin when we have weather unlike today where it's really rainy. But
yeah, gotcha. So, when people think about suburbia, automatically comes up traffic, infrastructure, access to health services. What do you think? Like, for a young family, do you think they should try to live in a city even though it's really, hard for them financially? Or do you think it's worth the some of the drawbacks from living in this more suburban setting, such as Efrat or Alfei Menashe or Mevon Modin, where you're further from access to work or social services or culture, so on and so forth?
So those are questions that are really, really subjective. I mean, I made Aliyah with my wife and family. We moved to I guess you'd call it a bungalow colony in Chashmonaim, where the kids can run out. There's no Shabbat, there's no cars on Shabbat, and we had no concerns about that. My wife's sister followed us a year later, and she liked the big cities. She liked Modin, and there's something to be said about both communities. And we see each other as much as we can, and we discuss and describe the perks and the drawbacks of both communities. But when we were there on Shabbat a couple of months ago for a bar mitzvah, it was weird seeing cars on Shabbat. It had to, not because of a religious point of view, but because of a point that we never see that where we are, because it's a closed environment. So I think that's a very subjective view. One of the nice things, and I happened to have been up there yesterday with a colleague of mine, Alfei Menashe, and I showed him around, was the fact that it's already pretty well-established community. Now, unless you know about it, you'd say, what do I know about Alfei Menashe? But it's got a number of different options available. It's got the Kvutzot already there. There's a doar, there's a bakery, there's a pizza store, there's a commercial area, there's an industrial area. They have the infrastructure already, Batei Knesiot, Mikvot, they have the infrastructure already in place, so you're not starting anew. It's even closer to when my friend who was coming in from Yerushalayim said to me, my gosh, this is really close to the 6. Well, that's why we positioned our projects right there. We're not going so far east into the Shomron. We do like where Shomron or Konei Shomron is. This is mamash 6 or so minutes from the exit off of the 6. So that makes it easier for people to travel. In terms of schooling, in terms of other things, listen, when people decide where they want to live, they're looking at a couple of things. Without a doubt, cost is a factor. Cost is a factor. You mentioned living in the big city. Yeah, you can be living in the big city, spending 7,000-8,000 shekel a month on rent, but you're not buying anything. You're not getting any. You're not gaining anything from that. A young couple who could decide to do the same purchase if they have the money to put down and use that 7,000-8,000 shekel a month rent towards the mortgage. At the end of the day, they have something tangible. And you and I both agree that having something tangible is something to be said.
Right.
Something
right.
to be said.
Right. 100%. You know, I spoke to someone yesterday, and he told me, you know, historically the S&P 500 has outperformed the Israeli real estate market, even in the greatest, you know, in the time when it gave the best returns. And he said, realistically, technically speaking, if I took my money and invested in the S&P 500, I would make more money than even owning a primary residence. And I said, there's 2 problems with that logic that you're not taking into account. At the end of the day, we're humans and we don't behave in a rational manner. So to say that someone's going to take all that money and invest it and not touch it at all, and it's just going to sit there, from a human perspective, I have a hard time dealing with that. And also, I ran out a very interesting scenario on a board where when you invest in the S&P 500 or in the equities or in the stock market, you can only invest dollar for dollar, right? Where you invest $1, you get $1 worth of equities. Whereas in real estate, because of the leverage you have with the banks and the interest that the bank gives you, every time you put in $1, you can actually buy $3 with that dollar, and get the appreciation in the property value there. So as far as investing, you know, that's something we can discuss, but definitely for a primary residence, I think that every individual should definitely aim to buy and purchase a primary residence. Of course, if they're able to, you know, some people are not even there, but the people who are able to buy a primary residence, I definitely think that's the right idea.
I'm going to throw another reason why one should buy real estate as opposed to putting the money in stock. And this is not something most Americans or even Israelis would know about. If I take money and I buy a piece of property in 1950s, and it grows and grows and grows, and my wife and I decide to sell it, and now the gain is worth, I don't know, we bought it for $250, it's now worth $750. So there's a gain of $500,000. If I sell that stock versus selling that real estate, what's the difference? If I sell the real estate as my primary residence, my wife and I are able to exclude $500,000 of gain. Compare that to sale of the stock. If I sell the $250,000 worth of the basis that I have in the stock and I make $750 and I sell it, I'm paying tax on the total amount. So yeah, that's why there's an incentive from a tax perspective, a tax concept, to purchase real estate, because they incentivize you from tax theory to do it that way.
That's from the U.S. side, right?
But even though it's the U.S. side, my understanding, and I haven't researched this in a while, that if your property is in Israel as your primary residence, you would still be able to gain that exclusion.
Oh, yeah, 100%. On the U.S. side. Yeah, yeah.
On the U.S. side,
But,
yeah. I'm not speaking about Israeli taxes.
Right. By the way, I wanted to ask you.
Let me interrupt. I am now speaking about Israeli taxes. You could sell each house in Israel every 4 years and exclude tax. That's my understanding as well.
Well, I just want to say from the Israeli side, there is a way to put in equities into tax advantaged account up to some reasonable maximum. I'm not an expert, I'm not a CPA, but then leave it as an inheritance for your children. As long as they don't liquidate, they would inherit that. But I did want to ask you something very interesting that many people don't know about, that the first on the Israeli side, and then I was wondering if you have any insight onto the American side. So many people don't know that actually Israel encourages investing in real estate, even with the high prices. And for the first 5,000 shekels of monthly income from residential real estate, it's completely tax-free. It's not only completely tax-free, you don't even have an obligation to report it. So, the same thing happens with US taxes, where most Americans who are middle class don't actually end up owing Uncle Sam or the US any money, but just the fact that you have to report it and pay a CPA is a tax unto itself because you have to pay for it. So if it's tax-free in Israel, do you have any insight onto how that looks on the American side as far as income from residential real estate by any chance?
So the American taxing authority is one of the leading taxing authorities, probably the biggest corporation in the world, if you will, where they tax worldwide income. So if you're an American living in Israel and you're making income, even though, if you're an American living in it, and there's been a lot of articles written because the tax rates are so high that many Americans, and this is really away from the conversation of Kvutzot Rechisa, but many Americans are deciding to leave and give up their citizenship, and there's an exit fee to do just that. But if you're an American citizen, you're going to be taxed on worldwide income. Yeah, there are foreign tax credits and foreign tax treaties and the like, but income that you get on any property worldwide has to show up on its schedules, and that's Schedule E on the tax return. So if you're making income, you don't have to file that or include that on the Israeli side, but you have to show that on the American side.
Gotcha. Any chance that people have been trying to use like tax advantaged IRA accounts to purchase real estate in Israel? Have you seen any of that? Or
I think it's going to happen more quickly because recently there was what's called the Secure Act that was signed into law in January of this year. And the Secure Act works as follows. The Secure Act says if a mom dies and she has a $1 million IRA and she's got 2 kids, she can give that IRA to her children, and the children can spread it out over their life expectancy. So if the kids are in their 50s, they can spread it out over a 30-year period. So that each year they would have to draw on the money, and it's spread it out over a 30-year period. The government got wise and said, we want our money back on tax-deferred income sooner rather than later. We don't want to spread it out on children's 30-year life expectancy. We want to do it on a 10-year life expectancy. Same scenario, mom dies, leaving the money, $1 million to the kids. The kids now have to take that money out over a 10-year period as opposed to a 30-year period. If they're taking that money out sooner or more rapidly, they have to pay the tax quicker. Now they have all that money in the bank. What are they doing? Earning 2% in the American markets, if that? No, why don't you put it into an Alfei Menashe project? Why don't you put it into a Mavomo project? See yourself living there or investing in those projects, wind up 10 years from now looking back and say, that investment of $5,000 in Cheshbonim has grown 35 years later to $500,000. That's how I do it. And as great as the market is, you have very, several sleepless nights over the course of a year with the tanks and the ups and the downs. So that's how.
So 1 second. So what you're telling me, Benji, is that I'm right now I won the game, middle class, upper middle class, Jewish guy in New Jersey, and I have a fairly nice IRA of $1 million. I can buy into your project in Alfei Menashe, and then my son, who's newly married living in Israel, could rent from me for a reasonable rate in my apartment, and everyone wins. He pays me reasonable rent. I have my IRA grow in a more tax advantageous way for me.
We would have to consult with Israeli and American tax authorities. I was talking specifically when the person passed away. Now the money gets inherited by the kids, and what are they going to do with that money? Because they have to spread it out over a 10-year period as opposed to 30. But if parent wants to take that IRA and invest it in listen, IRAs, as everybody knows, is an individual retirement account, and it can own stocks, it can own bonds, it can own CDs, it can own mutual funds, it can own gold. And it also can own real estate, all right? So we would have to create a different style IRA. It's called a self-directed IRA.
Right.
See whether that makes sense or not for that individual investor or purchaser,
Gotcha.
okay? Now, the government, again, wants its money. And if they want their money, they're going to take that money out. And if you pull that money out of the IRA, there may be a tax involved, right? But that's why the purchase of the land should not come from the IRA, but the construction might. But that's something we would have to consult with lawyers about.
So,
what is a creative idea?
So, but the bottom line is that because of your past expertise, if anyone is trying to think about estate planning, and as part of the estate planning, they're thinking strongly about Israel, whether for financial reasons or because their children are here, you're in a unique situation where you can really guide them through both sides of the coin and figuring that out.
I have, over the last 25, 26 years, spoken to hundreds, if not thousands of clients. And in a very short period of time, I get to know their financial situation very quickly. And most of them follow the same pattern. And many of them do not make the right decisions, whether they don't have the right legal documents in place, whether they have accounts held wrong, whether they have accounts held with daughter, and then they die and son is protesting that that account all went to daughter. So I see how the financials should work, and I confer with my clients and tell them this is the better way of doing it. And I also would advise people, if they're asking, how best to structure a deal with this. For instance, I've got two pots of money. I've got a pot of money, $500,000 of cash, earning 1%. I've got the second pot of money, $500,000 in an IRA with Exxon, Amazon, Apple, and the like. Where do I want to take the money to buy into my project? I don't want to touch the IRA because that will trigger an income tax. I want to take the money that's not making any money and use this fungible cash account to apply that towards the purchase of a piece of property here in Israel.
Very cool. Yeah, in my work, I work with a lot of, younger families, and I try to keep them from making the small mistakes that end up being big mistakes in the long term as far as how they manage their investments. Just as an example, from the Israeli side, many people will have money in Kupat Gemel LaHashka'a, or they have something in a tax advantage account, such as a Keren Ishtalmut, and they'll pull out the tax advantage account that is tax-free forever and use the account that is
Correct.
that is taxed, and it's just basic mistakes like that really it's worth every penny of guidance that you can get on it. Where many times you go to a CPA, you go to a lawyer, you go and they tell you, what's my return on my investment for, and many times it could be literally 10, 20, 30, 40, 50x, just with the simple optimization.
We spoke about this or mentioned it briefly, but now we're highlighting it. Why people are turning to myself as the organizer of the Kvutzot Rechisa. Because I have such a strong background in both law and accounting, and I understand finances. And more than that, when an advertisement went out in a local Jewish paper in Teaneck, New Jersey, my younger brother who lives in the Teaneck area said to me, "What in God's name do you know about Israeli real estate?" I said, "I don't know as much as I want to know at the moment, but I know that Yariv Aharon is my partner." Okay? So I team up with the right kind of people to make this happen. Okay? There's no doubt in my mind that when you deal with a person who knows what they're doing in the ins and outs, it's going to make things much smoother than if you're just a native off the block. But what I bring to the table is the strong financial legal background plus the Anglo concept of things. What he brings to the table is the ins and outs of how this works, how this functions. And that's why our team works well together. And that's why we don't need to have a big Israeli corporation hire somebody to do all the marketing, okay? Because that's going to cost and drive the price up on these units, because you have to pay these poor people to do all the advertising involved.
Gotcha. Tell me, Mevo Modi'im, is there still room to get in, or are you guys all sold out there?
The project that we're waiting for the Choveret on is 42 units. And we did a smart thing that we did not wait until the Choveret came out, or it hasn't come out yet, to do the marketing. We did a Zoom call, I think it must have been April or May, and we had 150 or so people on the line. There were knocks on my door afterwards asking me to buy 5, 6 units. So we sold a lot of units. For whatever reason, people decided to back out because of the schlepping of the time. We have already sold 37 out of 42 units, 35 out of 42 units, excuse me. So there are 7 units in our list that are still available. And that, again, all the particulars about that project is on the website, but it's a 250-meter project, and the purchase price is $2.65 million for a semi-attached home. And if you go to Modi'in, which is about 10 minutes up the road, a semi-attached home for 250 meters is going to exceed 4 million shekel. And I'll go a step further. You talk about guarantees. When this project is done and you've paid in 2.6 million shekel, whatever the exact amount is off the top of my head, I don't remember. I guarantee you that after this is done, if a buyer turns to you and say, I want to buy it, he's not going to offer you 2.62 million shekel. He's going to offer you 2.8, 3.2, 3.3, whatever it may be. And that's how real estate here is in Israel.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to say, you know, Benji's coming from the sales side, but I totally believe it, because I live in the area, and you guys have to understand where Mevo Modi'im is located. It's absolutely amazing. And I'm not just saying this. It's in the middle of a forest. It's literally like a 3-minute drive from Modi'in. It's less than half an hour to Tel Aviv, half an hour to Yerushalayim on a highway. And a kicker is that in Israel, every yeshuv belongs to a municipality. So the municipality that Mevo Modi'in belongs to is actually one of the most wealthiest in Israel, because one of the major drivers of income from municipalities is taxing commercial business places, and the airport sits in that municipality. So they get all the money from all the commercial properties around the airport, correct, Benji?
Also, I believe Shoham is in that Moitza as well. So you're getting all the OSEM and all those factories that are on 6 and the 444.
I think that actually belongs to the city of Shoham, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. But bottom line, it's a very wealthy municipality with great social services to its clients. And once Mevo Modi'in manages to, let's say, clean up its hippie past, it's going to be an absolute winner of a location. It's like growing up in a bungalow colony in upstate New York, while being 30 minutes from New York City and 30 minutes from Boston. That's the Israeli equivalent, I would say.
So now that you agree? Now that you mentioned bungalow colony in New York, I can tell you a personal story. My parents bought into Vacation Village many, many, many years ago, 35 years ago. And when we moved to Chashmonim, my kid said to me, oh, it's Vacation Village year round. So I really envision Mevo Modi'in as being the mini Chashmonim, whereas Chashmonim has, let's say, 1,000, 1,200 families between Ganei and Chashmonim. There you'll have 300 families. It's going to be a year-round bungalow colony.
Yeah, it'll be awesome. By the way, so I can't afford to buy there. Now it just brought a thought into my mind. Is it possible for a couple people to get together and buy a unit with you guys, or?
You'd have to have one person whose name is the lead person.
Gotcha.
And let's say, Eden, you're the one who's going, and you want to have your father-in-law and your mother-in-law and your wife's in-laws wife's parents come in and kick money to you. You're the one whose name is on the property, but we're not going to have a syndicate of a group of 12 people putting it in. Yes,
too many people will be calling you Benji. That wouldn't work.
with pleasure, with pleasure.
But I will mention, let's talk about another real estate hack in Israel that might be interesting for people to know, is that if you sell a property and it's not a primary residence, there's property tax that you have to, when selling and buying. If you own less than a third of a property, you don't have to pay property tax on it, on the sale.
I am not
If you're
afraid
buying I'm sorry, I think I might have messed that up. If you own less than a third and you buy another property, you can get the exemption on that next property. So let's say I own less than a third in Mevo Modi'in and I don't own anything else, and I buy a house in Modi'in, I can get the 1.7 million tax exemption on that house in Modi'in, as opposed to having to pay from zero.
I am not ashamed or embarrassed to say I don't know. And clients and investors and group members like the fact to say that when I say that, as opposed to me fluffing it and flubbing it and say, well, maybe possibly. I can come back with the actual answer, speaking to an expert about that. But the concept that you described may very well be the case. I just am not familiar with that.
Yeah, and of course, don't take this to the bank. It's just general knowledge. And before you do anything, consult a CPA to really make sure it works for you.
I think that's a prudent disclaimer that everybody should be consulting with their own financial and tax advisors before they embark on a project like this.
Yeah, I just say it to put that seed in your brain to remember, if you're thinking about something like this, it's something to discuss with your CPA to see if it's potentially doable. And by the way, it's kind of a funny law. By the way, this is just highlights the fact that tax law isn't based in rationality. It's based in tax law that the government passed. Because if you own less than a third of a villa in Herzliya, it's still going to be worth a lot more than any other average apartment. But that's the way the law is, and so that's the way the tax authority, interprets it, and it is what it is.
Well, definitely tax policy encourages certain social actions, whether home purchasing and the like. There's incentives. Mortgage interest deduction, et cetera, is one of the big ones that we are well familiar with and the like. I think people have to understand that when we bought into the project way back when in 2012, I think in Harish, the population that was targeted was the young religious Zionist. And when I went there to the Kennesses, I saw a lot of middle-aged men. Now, either they were buying for their families, or they were buying as an investment, or what have you. But bottom line was they were buying. They weren't sitting on the sidelines outside of the game. They were participating in the game. And I think that speaks volumes, because the government, the economy needs, especially now with COVID, they need the economy growing. They need to bring it back into focus. And when you have individuals coming into the game as an investor or as a young adult, listen, I have not assessed who's moved into Harish over the last 10 or so years, but I imagine it's a lot of young adults who are able to afford rents of rather cheap amounts. If you want Mevo Modi'in, that may not be the same economic scale. If you want something similar to Harish 10 years later, Alfei Menashe is the project for you. Gotcha.
Well, Benji, I think that's it. It's really been great talking with you, and I hope viewers found this beneficial. If anyone has any more follow-up questions, where can they reach you? Well, you can start at the website, which is Tikva Group, TIKVA-Group.com, C-O-M, Tikva Group without the H. Or you can reach me via email, benjamin@tikvagroup.com, or my phone number, which is 050-380-1632. All right. Thanks so much, Benji, for coming on, and have a wonderful day. Thank you. You too. Appreciate your time.